VLPSos here. This is a video lesson for Python programming, nested for loops. I recommend pausing and practicing on occasion. I'm going to read this comment after providing the example that it refers to. I'm going to write a for loop example, but I'm going to start with a print line which will serve as a visual clue when we run these examples to separate the examples that are provided. And in between these two print lines, I'm going to provide an example of a for loop with the keyword for, the iterating variable count, and the list that the values of count will become one at a time in turn as we iterate the code block. Iterate is a word that we use very often in programming. It means to repeat. And iteration is a single repetition of a repetitive process. Now I need the code block for this for loop. It's indented, and it'll be simple. I'll print the value of the iterating variable. Now the comment. Nested means one inside the other. The following for loop is not nested. Remember, a for loop has an iterating variable and a list of values the iterating variable will take in the order that they are listed. The code block is executed once for every value that the iterating variable takes in the list. The iterating variable is count. The list of values that it will take is ordered. There are 4 elements in the list, so this code block, which is the print statement, will be iterated 4 times, once for each value of count. We can observe the output. There are the 4 values in the same order that they are in the list. That's how for loops work. Another comment, in the code above, the iterating variable is count. The iterating variable would be assigned a set of values one at a time from the provided list. The code block that is looped or iterated is indented under the keyword for. So in this example, I've been repeating myself, but the vocabulary that we use that is highlighted by capitalizing it in the descriptions is very important, and we use it all the time, so we want to make this example solid. We are going to now write an example of nested for loops. The following is an example of nested for loops, and when I write this example, I'm going to use my print lines so that when I run my code, I can easily distinguish what belongs to what example. And in between these 2 print lines, I'm going to start another for loop. For number in range, the range function will produce the list that the iterating variable number will take. And I'm going to write the code block for this for loop. But the code block itself will contain another for loop with a different iterating variable, this time letter, in, and then I'm going to provide a list of strings, simple strings. I'm going to make it a length of 4, and those values in the strings will simply be A, B, C, and D. So I have a for loop inside of a for loop. And the code block for the inside for loop, the nested for loop, will be a print, if I can manage to type it. And in this print, I'm going to print both iterating variables. Number will be the outside loop, letter is the inside loop. When I run this, after putting some new lines to space these examples out, We can see that the second example, the nested for loops, produces an output, a list, that has 12 entries. And a comment. Observe the output. Notice that the inside loop repeats every time the outside loop iterates. And we can see that the inside loop, which produces the letters, has to iterate completely through its list A, B, C, D, while the outside loop's iterating variable value remains 1. And then only when the inside loop with letters has completed its iteration does it then go to the second value of the outside loop. There are 2 iterating variables. Make a note of how and when their values change. And moving on, recall that an array is a list of lists. One has been defined here, an array. The outside square brackets are the outside list, and inside that list we have 4 lists of length 3, creating a matrix or an array of information. The array above has made use of commas and spaces to make it easy to see and think of the data arranged in rows and columns. So we don't need to structure an array or a list of lists like this. We could cancel the spaces that have been used and the new lines in order to make it look visually organized. It's only organized for the human eye. The Python language does not need it to be. We can think of this array as having 4 rows and 3 columns. We're going to use nested for loops to index every element in this array. This technique of thinking of arrays or data that's in arrays as rows and columns is a common practice. So we want to make sure that we understand this example well. I'm going to borrow some print lines in order to isolate this new example. I'm going to make nested for loops beginning with the outside for loop with an iterating variable of row. So the outside loop is going to iterate or process or repeat once for every row in my array. How many rows do I have in my array? I can count them 1, 2, 3, 4. So I need to iterate 4 times. And the values I intend to use as indices because I'm going to index the array with my iterating variables. So I need to start my row at 0 because 0 is the initial position in an ordered list. And I'm going to go up to the 4th row. There is not a 4th row in my array. The indices of the rows are 0, 1, 2, and 3. But if we remember, the upper bound when we produce a range is not used. It's a signal to stop the range. So if I iterate through the range function, creating the list of values that row will take, I'm going to get 0, 1, 2, and 3, and then it'll stop at 4 but not use it. Those will go through the rows of my array. Now for every row, I want to go through the columns, so I have a nested for loop. My iterating variable in the inside loop is going to be called column, and the columns are going to take on the values that will be produced by a range function. These are going to be indices as well, so I need to start with a position of 0, and then observe how many columns I have. In this array I have 3, so I'm going to stop at 3, which means that my range function and the iterating will produce the values that the iterating variable takes, in this case column. Column will start with the value of 0, and then 1, and then 2, but not 3, because 3 is going to be where we stop. Now for the code block in my nested for loops. I want the value of the array that I've defined called an array. So I'm going to access it at a particular location. So I need 2 indices. The first one is going to be the row location, and that'll be the iterating variable row. The second is the column location, which is the iterating variable column. I will get every single value in my array, one at a time, as these nested for loops process. And what I'm going to do with that value is print it. I'm going to print and include in the print the location by saying row, which is an integer, and column, which is also an integer. These are my iterating variables, row and column, and then the value at that location, which is also an integer. Close my string, then supply the values, row, column, value. And let's see what we get. In example 3, I can see that my values 1, 2, 3 all the way to 12 have been reported, and their row and column location within the array. I could take one of these and verify, do I get value 11 in row 3, column 1? Let's take a look at the array. Row 3, I go down starting at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, it's the bottom row. Column 1 starts at 0, it's the middle column, and there I have the value of 11. So I've confirmed that my algorithm corresponds to my array. And a comment about this. This last example is especially important because computer graphics are essentially rectangles of colored dots, pixel arrays. When we get to graphics, we will use nested for loops very similar to this one to create and manipulate graphics. Now you have seen how to make nested for loops. Is it possible to have 3 nested for loops? A for loop inside of a for loop inside of a for loop. Try it and write a simple program that produces output that shows evidence of a for loop inside of a for loop inside of a for loop. And of course, have fun.